Thelma, my grandmother, was an astonishing woman. First, she was beautiful, especially when she was young. But I guess being better looking when young is a fact that applies to us all. That beauty, however, was only the beginning of what made her exceptional. Her charisma became magnified and more central to her appeal as she got older, giving her a special priority in every room she entered. Her attendance communicated itself like the light from a window, a change in temperature, or something as intangible as mood. If she was there, her presence became the central fact of that moment. And all that happened before she even said a word. However, when she spoke, her full power became manifest as she surveyed all of creation from a height of 5'7". The woman was the incarnation of storytelling. She possessed a facility steeped in the King James translation of Scripture. Her mouth opened and Isaiah, St. Paul, or the Psalms poured out, often literally, since she had memorized and integrated so much of Holy Writ. Scripture didn't just influence her speech, it was often substituted for it. She saw her life as the source of a narrative that deserved to be told. Memories of a horse became parable. Her grandmother's paralysis became gospel. And the memory of a car's headlights became wisdom literature. She could weave prophecy from the threads of the routine and the forgettable. It was commonly believed she could describe the weather and you'd feel cold. Or she could tell you of someone's death and you'd feel lonely. Move over, Abraham. Let us give witness to the story of Thelma. George, my grandfather, was very much unlike her. He did possess comparable intelligence and ambition, but in him, charisma became calculation, and faith was replaced by analysis. In his youth, he was a practical man with almost maniacal devotion to success. 2/3 of a 24-hour day and 6 days of every week were reserved for work. And that one day off in times of good weather had nothing to do with the Sabbath and everything to do with golf. The source of Grandpa's obsessive behavior is lost to time. And even if he were alive today, his allergy to communication would make the truth impossible to determine. He was the youngest of 15 children, and all of his mother's first 14 were girls. Maybe the weight of parental expectation, long delayed and then placed squarely on him, played a role. Then there was his slight build, short stature, and a glass eye that resulted from a rock fight when he was a boy. This combination of factors made for a young man determined to beat his rivals, especially when those rivals were men against whom he needed to measure himself. All of those compelling qualities, however, became a kind of useless armor when he associated with women. In their company, he once again became the last, the slightest, and the only, a mere afterthought in a conversation that could just as well have taken place on another planet. A circumstance exacerbated by that glass eye receding into its socket while looking at the world and all of its women from a very odd angle. With men, he had something to prove and a determination to prevail. But with women, he had something to avoid and something for which to compensate. These short biographies explained why my grandparents had graduated well into their 20s without a significant other. As for my grandmother, there was simply too much of her to leave enough room for any man hoping to enjoy a traditional role in her life. And with my grandfather, there was little room in his life that wasn't about success and position. The words relationship and romance existed in a language he did not speak. If my purpose here is to explain how they came together, then there are two more complicating factors. One is that my grandfather lived in Oshaleta, Oklahoma, while my grandmother lived in Dallas, Texas, a distance by rail of 293 miles, and a distance in circumstance that could be measured only in light years. Another complicating factor is that their marriage, and therefore my very existence on this earth, can be attributed to my grandmother's use of a single written word. A feat of marvelous economy from a woman famous for speaking so well and at such great length. Predictably, my grandfather's presence in Dallas can be explained by his business. Before the government provided crop supports, loans from rural banks like the one owned by my grandfather were what allowed farmers to survive from planting to harvest. In turn, these rural banks in small towns like Oshaleta, population 419 in 1920, well, they depended on much larger banks in financial centers like Dallas. Hence, my grandfather made occasional trips to Dallas. Given his enthusiasm for golf, these trips allowed a workaholic from Oshaleta to live large in country clubs that had no equal in rural Oklahoma. One of these country clubs included in its membership Madril and Viron Williams, who were also brothers to my grandmother. Those friendships hatched on a golf course soon led to my grandfather being invited to the Williams family home. Subsequently, my grandmother's presence at that same family home became the reason that my grandfather's visits were prolonged and repeated. The absence of my grandfather's business as a distraction also explains why their relationship developed beyond mere acquaintance. All of this, however, continued to be anomalous to who my grandfather was. He was a fellow with painful insecurities who covered every self-doubt with drive, hard work, determination. And as unprecedented as such behavior was for my grandfather, it was equally extraordinary for my grandmother. She could give any potential suitor a level stare and no reason for optimism. Yet here, in the company of a hayseed from Oklahoma, she offered reason for encouragement. Neither of them are present to offer their rationale. Perhaps it boiled down to a man out of his element, overwhelmed by good looks and charisma of a woman from a place as exotic as Dallas, Texas. And a woman who surveyed local pickings, found them wanting, and instead opted for a successful man with an ego smaller than Texas extra large. It could be that. Or it might simply have been love in all its inscrutable majesty. Whatever inscrutable majesty there was, it still fell short when Grandpa's visit ended. Yes, finally, she was beautiful, compelling, and larger than life. But he was still George from Oshaleta. So he boarded the train, unable to summon the courage even to say goodbye. However long a train ride of 293 miles might have been in 1920, this train ride was much longer than that. A sense of missed opportunity and cowardice haunted him, as much as he regretted his inability to take the initiative with women in Oshaleta. At least he could console himself that failure there would lead to consequences he'd have to live with. In a town of 419, how many times a week would he have to pass by any woman who found him wanting? For how many years would that reminder be a fact in his life? Yet failure with this woman, who was special, just like Dallas was special, and far away, just like Dallas was far away, would have no repercussions. Perhaps the chances were slight that her interest was anything more than good manners, but what could be lost by putting that to the test? He was insulated from the worst consequences of rejection, and even so, his nerve had failed him. Realizing that being haunted by this memory was as bad as any rejection in Oshaleta could have been, he decided to write a letter. In that letter, written on the train, he told Thelma how much she meant to him, how her company exceeded the joy of any relationship he had ever known. He told her how a distance of 293 miles was now the saddest fact in his life. And finally, he offered up the only thing he thought might end that sadness: a proposal of marriage. He put that letter in an envelope, both sealed and addressed, and gave it to the conductor with a special proviso. For a sum of $50, then determined to be his weekly wage, the conductor was to hand deliver the envelope to the specified address, knock on the door, and then wait for a woman named Thelma. Once she appeared, she was to open the envelope, read the letter, and then answer the question therein with but a single word placed at the bottom of the page. Finally, on the conductor's return to Oshaleta, he was to deliver that reply to my grandfather's place of business and put it into my grandfather's hand. For as long as I knew my grandmother, she kept that letter. However, she did not share it with me until I was middle-aged, and she was a widow living alone. At the bottom of my grandfather's handsome script was but a single word: yes.